After 3.5 years of exile from Geneva, Calvin was finally persuaded to return to that city. He returned with the clear understanding that Geneva was committed to a return to biblical church discipline and was persuaded of the necessity of such discipline. Theodore Beza writes in his Life of Calvin, Calvin, being thus restored at the great entreaty of his church, proceeded to set it in order. Seeing that the city stood greatly in need of a curb, he declared in the first place that he could not properly fulfill his ministry unless, along with Christian discipline, a regular presbytery with full ecclesiastical authority were established. At that point, therefore, laws for the election of a presbytery and for maintenance of that order were passed, agreeably to the Word of God, and with the consent of the citizens themselves. These laws, Satan afterwards made many extraordinary attempts to abolish, but without success. Calvin returned, but his struggles were not over. In fact, it can be said that his struggles were just beginning. Calvin was committed to the necessity of church discipline. He wrote in his Institutes, if no society, nay, no house with even a moderate family can be kept in a right state without discipline, much more necessary is it in the church, whose state ought to be the best ordered possible. Hence, as the saving doctrine of Christ is the life of the church, so discipline is, as it were, its sinews. For to it is owing that the members of the body adhere together, each in its own place. Wherefore, all who either wish that discipline were abolished, or who impede the restoration of it, whether they do this by design or through thoughtlessness, certainly aim at the complete devastation of the church. Again, he writes, in excluding from its fellowship manifest adulterers, fornicators, thieves, robbers, seditious persons, perjurers, false witnesses, and the rest of this sort, as well as the insolent, who when duly admonished of their lighter vices, mock God and his judgment, the church claims for itself nothing unreasonable, but practices the jurisdiction conferred upon it by the Lord. On Calvin's return to Geneva after his banishment, he immediately set to work to institute a new discipline in the Genevan church. The day after his return, he and the other ministers met and began drawing up a definite order for the government and the discipline of the church. The result was the formulation of the ecclesiastical ordinances of the Church of Geneva, which was ratified and officially introduced into the church on November 20, 1541. This document is the earliest predecessor of the very church order that is used in many Reformed churches today. The restoration of discipline and the office of ruling elder occupy a large place in the ecclesiastical ordinances. The constant thorn in Calvin's side in his efforts to restore discipline to the Church of Geneva were the libertines. This was a kind of political party in Geneva made up of wealthy and influential citizens of the city. At first, these people had embraced the Reformation with eagerness, but not out of any real love for the Reformed faith. Their main objective was to use the Reformation as a means to throw off the yoke of Roman Catholicism. Their battle cry was liberty, no tyranny. When it became plain that the new church discipline introduced by Calvin was in many ways more rigorous and demanding than Rome had ever been, they reacted violently against Calvin and the pastors of Geneva who supported him. At every turn, they opposed Calvin, crying out against the new discipline as an infringement upon their liberty. They were the ones largely responsible for Calvin's banishment from Geneva. If they had had their way, he would have been banished again a dozen times or so. Calvin once commented that compared to the libertines, he considered the Pope to be a pretty good fellow. And if you are familiar with Calvin's opinion of the Pope, you can gather what his feelings were towards the libertines. In his preface to his commentary on the book of Psalms, Calvin rehearses his struggles with the libertines. Afterwards, for the space of 5 years, when some wicked libertines were furnished with undue influence, and also some of the common people, corrupted by the allurements and perverse discourse of such persons, desired to obtain the liberty of doing whatever they pleased without control, I was under the necessity of fighting without ceasing to defend and maintain the discipline of the church. To these irreligious characters and despisers of the heavenly doctrine, it was a matter of entire indifference, although the church should sink into ruin, provided they obtained what they sought, the power of acting just as they pleased. In the end, Calvin's endeavors, under the blessing of God, Calvin's endeavors on behalf of the recovery of discipline met with success, and the leaders of the libertines were banished from Geneva. Finally, in 1555, the struggle ended. 14 years after he came back to Geneva, finally,